She knocked, driven solely by the instinct to endure. He opened the door, expecting yet another night steeped in silence. Yet destiny had woven a different tale. Eliza and Jonas, once mere strangers united by their shared grief, found themselves thrust into a perilous situation that compelled them to evolve into something deeper. More than mere survivors, more than mere protectors, we are family. The wind howled through the valley, echoing the cries of a wounded creature. Snow swept in sideways, cutting through the fading light, consuming all that lay before it. Unmarked paths, devoid of signs, only white, and then even more white. Eliza Cooper wrapped her shawl more snugly around her shoulders, yet the frayed wool offered scant protection against the chill that seeped into her very bones. Alongside her, three diminutive shapes moved forward quietly, their heads bowed, features obscured by tattered scarves and faded hats. Nathan, the eldest at 10, held his jaw firmly shut, determined not to reveal any sign of vulnerability. Lila, scarcely touching her food, grasped his arm tightly, her steps growing increasingly unsteady with each hour that slipped away. And Ben, dear, gentle Ben, merely 5, whimpered softly as he clung to his mother's skirt, his little mittens frozen with ice. Eliza felt a searing ache in her legs, her lips fissured with each hushed plea for them to continue. She was uncertain of how much further they could journey. Uncertainty loomed over her, yet the urge to press on was undeniable. She simply would not after Matthew, not after the words he had spoken while riding away, abandoning them at Bitter Hollow, with nothing but a half-empty sack of flour and a mocking grin. "You'll find your way, Eliza. You consistently do." In the shadows, his voice lingered, a haunting echo, and the bitter taste of betrayal washed over her as the truth settled in. He hadn't merely departed for supplies, he had departed for eternity, and so she walked, through the tempest, through the pain, through the haunting stillness, until she beheld it, a glimmer of light. In the distance it flickered faintly, partially obscured by swaying pines and a thick veil of snow. A cabin. Eliza's knees trembled with the weight of relief, yet she summoned the strength to stand tall. "Come on," she murmured, her voice a raspy whisper directed at the children. "Just a touch more." They faltered the final 100 yards in unison, finally collapsing against the door. Eliza's knuckles felt the chill of numbness as she lifted her hand to knock, once, twice, 3 times, yet silence lingered in response. She rapped on the door once more, with greater force this time. Her voice faltered as she attempted to call out, yet only a harsh rasp emerged from her throat. At last the door let out a haunting creak as it opened. A figure lingered in the threshold, cloaked in the warm glow of the flames that danced behind him. He stood tall, his broad shoulders accentuated by a thick coat that draped heavily over his sturdy frame. His visage was etched with defined contours, and a beard sprinkled with silver strands. Yet it was his eyes that captivated Eliza. Frigid, cautious, and weary, he remained silent for what felt like an eternity. She felt the same, yet no words were necessary, not when 3 frozen children grasped their mother's skirt, trembling uncontrollably. The man's jaw tightened with a palpable intensity. He gracefully moved to the side. "Come on in." Eliza moved forward without a moment's pause. She guided the children indoors, almost pulling Ben along as they crossed the threshold. The door banged closed behind them, shutting out the howling of the wind. A wave of warmth enveloped them, accompanied by the crackling of the hearth and the subtle scent of pine mingling with smoke. The man advanced with purpose, drawing the chairs nearer to the warmth of the fire. "Take a seat. Embrace the warmth." Eliza complied, carefully unwrapping scarves and removing the rigid coats from her children's small frames. Nathan offered his support to Lila, gently rubbing her arms, while Ben nestled into Eliza's lap. The man slipped away into another room, re-emerging moments later, arms laden with heavy blankets and a kettle in hand. "Drink," he urged, as he poured steaming water into the chipped mugs. "It may not be much, but it certainly surpasses the chill of the cold." Eliza accepted the cup with gratitude, her numb fingers encircling it, as she cast a furtive glance at their host. He moved with the air of someone who preferred solitude over companionship. Every aspect of him, from the angle of his jaw to the sound of his boots striking the floorboards, conveyed a profound sense of isolation. Yet, he had not dismissed them. "Thank you," Eliza managed to say, her voice trembling from the biting wind and the grip of fear. The man let out a low grunt. He tended to the fire, coaxing sparks to dance up the chimney. "You've come a long way," he inquired, shattering the oppressive silence at last. Eliza paused, yet there was an undeniable quality to his unwavering presence, a gentle insistence that coaxed her to respond. "For 3 days," she murmured, "just east of Bitter Hollow, the wagon had broken down, and she had walked the rest of the way." The man remained utterly still, his eyes unwavering. What is the reason behind this? The impact of the word resonated deeper than she had anticipated. Uncomplicated. She swallowed, her gaze flickering to her children, who were now nestled together, half asleep by the warmth of the hearth. "Left," she said at last, "had to." That appeared to satisfy him. He refrained from probing. He offered a subtle nod, then reclined against the table, his arms folded across his chest. "Thank you," she said suddenly, her voice low yet resolute. Jonas arched an eyebrow. "For what purpose? For granting us the opportunity to stay, to avoid posing an excess of inquiries?" Jonas averted his eyes, allowing them to drift toward the slumbering children. "It appeared you had no further inquiries," he whispered softly. "It appeared that you were in need of some rest." Eliza sensed a constriction in her chest begin to ease. "I did," she whispered. For a fleeting instant, silence enveloped the space once more, neither burdensome nor devoid. Simply simple. Jonas stood up, extending his wide shoulders in a leisurely stretch. He remarked, "Storms are breaking. Feel free to venture out tomorrow if you wish." Eliza nodded slowly, yet an unsettling sensation curled within her stomach at the mere contemplation. Set forth. Return to a realm that had once left her bruised and solitary. Alternatively, remain, yet that was a contemplation reserved for a different evening. At this moment they found themselves in a haven of safety. For the moment the flames flickered with a constant glow. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Eliza Cooper dared to entertain the notion that perhaps, just perhaps, safety was not merely a fleeting illusion. The dawn emerged, casting a faint and hesitant glow across the landscape. At long last, the sky was free of snow for the first time in days. It loomed, dense and ashen, yet it was unmistakable. The tempest had moved on. Jonas Hale made his way onto the porch, the sound of his boots softly crunching against the hardened snow. He sensed the unmistakable aroma of transformation lingering in the atmosphere. It's not merely spring struggling to break free from winter's hold. There's an additional layer to this unfolding narrative. Within the confines of the home, Eliza and the children were already beginning to awaken. Nathan busily rolled up the quilts, his enthusiasm palpable as he sought to lend a hand. Lila sat, her fingers deftly weaving the strands of her doll's yarn hair, a gentle hum escaping her lips. Ben trailed after Jonas that morning, inquiring about the animals, the trees, and the world that lay beyond the snow. It was as if ordinary, excessively ordinary. Jonas understood that placing faith in the ordinary was a folly he could not afford. As the clock struck noon, Eliza found herself poised in the doorway, deftly wiping her hands on the fabric of her skirt, gazes fixated on the far-off ridge, where the path vanished into the embrace of the pines. "Do you believe it is secure at this moment?" she inquired gently. Jonas hesitated before responding. He set aside his axe, brushing away the sweat and frost that clung to his brow. "Safety isn't a gift from the land," he remarked after a pause. "Yet it is the silence that holds significance." Eliza nodded, yet uncertainty lingered in her expression. For a time, they toiled together, side by side. Jonas mended a fence rail that had splintered beneath the weight of the heavy snow. Eliza glided through the cabin, a soft melody escaping her lips as the children frolicked in the vicinity. There was an undeniable sense of tranquility, a grounding presence, and it was in that moment that the sound emerged. Echoes of hoofbeats. It was Jonas who first caught the sound, the rhythmic, deliberate clop of horses neither sprinting nor competing, simply exuding assurance. He emerged from the barn, his gaze sharpening as it fell upon the trail ahead. A figure materialized from the shadows of the trees, tall and slender, clad in a dark wool coat that seemed too exquisite for this rugged terrain. One came after the other, then a third emerged. The initial gentleman lifted his hat, unveiling his slicked back hair and a self-satisfied, recognizable grin. Jonas recognized his type immediately. Neither a wanderer nor a renegade, a situation more dire, a man who believed that law and power were his inherent entitlements. In the afternoon, the man called, his voice as smooth as polished creek stones. Jonas remained silent. From behind, the sound of the cabin door creaked open, slicing through the stillness. Eliza emerged, her hands instinctively brushing against the fabric of her apron. She beheld the men, frozen in place, her complexion drained of color. "Matthew," she whispered softly. Jonas felt no need to inquire. He was aware. The man dismounted with a deliberate grace, his boots sinking into the cold embrace of snow and mud beneath him. He yanked his gloves off with a nonchalant brutality. "Hello, Eliza?" Matthew Crowley drawled, his voice smooth and languid. "The journey to discover you has been a lengthy one." Eliza moved nearer to Jonas, instinctively positioning herself as a barrier between Matthew and her children. "What brings you to this place?" Her voice, though delicate, remained unwavering. Matthew's smile broadened, yet it failed to illuminate his eyes. "Ah, is there truly no greeting for your husband upon his return? You ceased to be that when you abandoned us to perish in the desolate void." Matthew tisked, shaking his head as if reprimanding a willful child. "Come now, my dear, let us not turn this into a spectacle. Time has been granted for contemplation, for introspection. It is evident that you and the children require appropriate care, a sense of structure, and a guiding presence to navigate through life." Jonas tensed, his jaw clenching tightly. "This isn't your place," he stated bluntly. Matthew's eyes drifted nonchalantly to Jonas, assessing him with a measured scrutiny. "Who might you be?" "The man beneath whose shelter they reside." Matthew let out a low, sardonic chuckle. "How wonderfully convenient, isn't it? A widow finds companionship with a mysterious stranger deep in the woods. Truly heartwarming." Jonas remained unperturbed. "You abandoned them to their fate, while I chose to stay." Matthew's allure faltered, his lips twisting into a smirk. "I have come to take back what rightfully belongs to me. I have already had a conversation with the sheriff in Glen Rock. I am their father, both by blood and by the dictates of law." Eliza's expression faltered ever so slightly at the utterance of that word. The realm of law. Jonas discerned the fear lurking within, not for her own sake, but for the sake of her children. Matthew noticed it as well, and he pressed on. "I'll return tomorrow," he remarked casually, as though he were merely chatting about the forecast. "This evening is yours to bid your farewells. However, do not be misled, Eliza. They are departing alongside me. The court's decrees are unforgiving towards those women who choose to flee." He climbed back onto his horse, offering a single nod to his men. The trio pivoted and galloped away, their departure marked by a swirl of disturbed snow and an enveloping hush. That night the cabin lay shrouded in an oppressive silence, a haunting stillness that echoed with unspoken fears. The children had absorbed every word. Nathan perched rigidly by the hearth, making a valiant effort to mask his fear, yet ultimately falling short. Lila held on to Eliza, her voice barely above a whisper as she inquired whether they would have to depart. Ben wept gently, his tears soaking into his sister's lap. Eliza moved restlessly around the cramped space, her hands twisting together until they were sore. "What shall I do now?" Her voice trembled as she whispered, "He possesses the law. He possesses wealth. I'm unable to contest that." Jonas lingered at the table, his gaze fixed intently on the dancing flames. "You don't have to face this battle by yourself," he stated with quiet assurance. Eliza ceased her restless movements, fixing her gaze on him, her eyes tinged with a deep crimson. "Could you clarify what you mean?" Jonas inclined his body, his voice a hushed certainty. "I have encountered men of his kind in the past. They believe that paper and threats render them invulnerable. Yet this place, this town, has witnessed your true self, the actions you've taken. You sustained these children through it all. What you have created is remarkable. He relies on instilling fear to render you silent." He rose gradually, his shoulders squared with determination. "Yet we shall not remain silent, neither tomorrow nor when he arrives, anticipating our capitulation." Eliza gazed at him, her tears poised delicately on her lashes. "What if he compels them to take the children?" Jonas acted without a moment's pause. "Then he shall have to seize them from my grasp." The fire crackled with a fierce intensity, sending a flurry of sparks into the night sky. For an extended pause, Eliza remained silent. With deliberate grace, she advanced a step. With a boldness she had never known, she leaned in, her fingers gently grazing Jonas's arm. "Would you really consider that? Is this meant for us?" Jonas cast his gaze upon her hand before returning to meet her eyes. "For family," he murmured softly, "I would go further." Eliza held back her tears, resolute in her silence this time. Instead, she gave a single, resolute nod exuding confidence. "In that moment we rise united." Outside, the frigid wind murmured among the branches, yet within, two spirits, shattered and restored, had just etched a boundary in the snow. By the break of dawn, Matthew Crowley would come to understand precisely what that entailed. The morning arrived with a piercing clarity. The sun ascended, its light wan and frigid, stretching elongated shadows across the frost-laden hills. It ought to have resonated as a fresh dawn, a moment brimming with potential and renewal. Yet for Eliza Cooper and Jonas Hale, it seemed more akin to the calm before a tempest. Matthew Crowley was set to return. He claimed he would come back, and men of his kind did not make empty promises, not when dignity and authority were at stake. Within the cozy confines of the cabin, Eliza meticulously dressed her children. Nathan remained silent, his jaw clenched tightly. Lila inquired whether they were required to depart. Ben, too young to grasp the complexities around him, held tightly to his mother, his eyes wide and filled with confusion. "You're not going anywhere," Eliza whispered, her fingers gently weaving through Lila's hair, infusing her voice with a serene determination, regardless of what that man might say. Before the first light of dawn, Jonas found himself outside. With a deliberate focus, he chopped wood, inspected his rifle, and fortified the front door of the cabin. He wasn't gearing up for a battle, not in the strictest sense, yet he had no intention of retreating. As midday approached, the atmosphere grew heavy with tension, and then, like a distant echo, they heard it, the sound of horses. This time, it's not only Matthew. He had arrived with companions. As the children gathered by the window, 4 riders emerged into sight. Jonas lingered on the porch, arms folded, while Matthew descended with a measured, almost theatrical slowness. Today, his smirk cut through the air, brimming with confidence. Trailing behind him was Sheriff Tate, a figure well regarded in these regions for keeping to himself, provided his pockets remained lined. Matthew strode ahead with an air of confidence, as if the very ground he walked on was his to command. "Eliza," he called, his voice resonating through the entire clearing. "I have arrived, just as I vowed. It is time to welcome my children back home." Eliza stood in the doorway, her posture impeccable, shoulders aligned, even as a slight tremor danced through her fingers. "They are home," she declared with conviction. Matthew's smile faded. "Let's keep this from becoming a mess. Sheriff Tate possesses the documents, custody duly signed and sealed. I stand firmly within my rights." Sheriff Tate carefully unfolded a time-worn piece of paper, his voice flat and authoritative as he began to read aloud. "Eliza Cooper, you are commanded to surrender the children into the care of their father, Matthew Crowley. Non-compliance." "That's enough," Jonas interjected, his voice a low rumble infused with unwavering resolve. Every gaze was fixed upon him. Jonas advanced, positioning himself squarely between Matthew and the cabin. "I understand your true nature, Crowley," Jonas stated with calm resolve. "You are a man who abandoned his family to perish in the cold, a man who views others as mere possessions. But not in this place, not any longer." Matthew's gaze sharpened. "Your opinion holds no weight in this matter, Hale. The law indeed does." Jonas remained unperturbed. "The law may be indifferent to your identity, yet this town holds a different perspective." As if summoned by an unseen force, voices echoed from beyond the tree line. Mrs. Webb, Pastor Connor, and the venerable Doc Briggs, they approached, wrapped tightly against the chill, expressions marked by a steadfast determination. Behind them, townsfolk who had observed Eliza over the past months stood by, witnessing her as she painstakingly reconstructed something delicate yet genuine. "We stand with her," Mrs. Webb said simply, stepping beside Jonas. Pastor Connor gave a thoughtful nod. "She nurtured those children with elegance when no one else dared to." Matthew's confidence wavered. "This is none of your concern," he retorted sharply. "It is now," Jonas declared, his tone steady yet laced with an unmistakable certainty. The sheriff adjusted his stance, a hint of unease flickering across his face. "Crowley, the value of this paper hinges on the willingness of individuals to uphold it." Matthew's expression grew somber. His gaze flickered between the swelling throng and the formidable stone wall that was Jonas Hale. "Do you believe this has come to an end?" He let out a sharp hiss. Do you really believe that a handful of farmers and widows can stand in my way? I believe you've already come to a halt, Jonas responded. The silence descended with a weighty presence. Matthew's bravado shattered entirely. With a scathing curse, he thrust the papers into the sheriff's hands and strode angrily toward his horse. This isn't the end, he called out, glancing back over his shoulder. Jonas nodded in agreement, his voice barely above a whisper. It is the dawn of a new chapter. Matthew rode away, a sense of defeat clinging to him, yet still exuding an air of danger. The sheriff paused for a moment, then decided to follow. The lawman's shoulders drooped as he came to understand the direction in which the wind had shifted. The townspeople hesitated, bestowing Eliza with gentle words and tender smiles before gradually retreating to their abodes. There was no celebration. It was unnecessary. They arrived at the crucial moment. That sufficed. Within the confines of the cabin, the tension shattered like fragile ice beneath one's feet. Eliza lingered by the window, her gaze fixed on the final riders as they vanished beyond the ridge. Her hands quivered, yet it was not out of fear. Jonas approached her, his presence so near that she could sense the warmth emanating from his chest. He will return, she murmured gently. Perhaps, Jonas conceded, yet we too shall endure day by day, for as long as necessary. In that moment she gazed at him with a depth that transcended the ordinary, and within her, a barrier shattered, not from trepidation but from a profound sense of release. She moved nearer, her head gently resting against his shoulder. You didn't need to defend us, she murmured. Jonas shifted subtly, his hand rising to lay softly against her back. I did, he said simply, because you're not alone anymore. For a moment, they stood together in the fading afternoon light, not as savior and saved, not as strangers forced together by circumstance, but as something far more fragile and far more powerful. Outside, winter clung tenaciously to the fringes of the landscape, yet within, beside the flickering flames and the gentle rise and fall of slumbering children, Eliza and Jonas remained resolute against the tempest, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, neither of them experienced the chill of the air. The days that ensued carried a sense of buoyancy, not due to the disappearance of danger. Matthew Crowley's shadow still hovered just beyond the ridge, but rather because the worst had yet to unfold. The children remained, Eliza lingered, and Jonas Hale, who had endured countless winters in solitude within his cabin, surrounded only by wood shavings and the echo of silence, found himself no longer alone. Spring arrived gradually, yet with unwavering persistence. The snow receded initially at the cabin's periphery, creating delicate streams that murmured softly as they flowed by the porch. New buds emerged from the icy earth, delicate hints of green that Eliza took a moment to appreciate each morning. Within those walls, laughter resurfaced, reminiscent of a melody once lost but now rediscovered. Nathan is now assisting Jonas with the repairs. The boy's hands, once delicate and awkward, became confident as he hammered nails and lifted timber without a word of instruction. Jonas imparted his knowledge on the art of knot tying and the skill of sharpening tools. Nathan absorbed each word, driven by a fervent desire to demonstrate his worth. Lila and Ben whiled away the hours by the creek, collecting smooth stones and intricately weaving daisy chains. One afternoon they trailed behind Jonas into the woods, and upon their return, Lila proudly displayed a small carving he had crafted for her, a fox, intricate and inquisitive. For Ben, Jonas skillfully crafted a modest whistle. The boy dashed across the yard, emitting bright, joyful melodies that made Eliza laugh so heartily she had to take a seat. That sound, her laughter, caught Jonas off guard the first time it reached his ears. The cabin had remained silent for ages, its only companions the whispering wind and the groaning of aged timber. One evening Eliza lingered by the hearth, brushing flour from her hands after the art of bread making. Jonas lingered close, honing the edge of his knife, yet his gaze repeatedly wandered in her direction. The children were nestled in their beds, weary from their enchanting pursuit of fireflies. A stillness enveloped them, yet it held no discomfort. It was filled with anticipation. Eliza ultimately shattered it. They're happy here, she murmured gently. Jonas inclined his head in agreement. Indeed, they ought to be. Eliza paused for a moment, then made her way across the room, taking a seat opposite him. She inclined her body forward, her voice dropping to a softer whisper. Yet do you truly find yourself in that state? Jonas ceased his work with the blade. He placed it down with deliberate care, then locked eyes with her. For an extended period he started, his voice gravelly, yet imbued with a certain softness. The stillness of this place enveloped me, a serene choice I had made for myself. I pondered, it is preferable to embrace solitude than to bear the weight of what I have lost. Eliza's gaze grew tender, and she remained silent. Yet, your arrival changed everything, you and they. He inclined his head toward the back room, where soft whispers and muted laughter continued to seep through the crevices, and I came to understand that silence does not always equate to tranquility. At times it feels utterly devoid of substance. Eliza felt a constriction in her throat. I never intended to linger here for so long, she confessed. Jonas offered a subtle smile. I never intended to desire you in that way. For a fleeting instant the words lingered in the air, unrefined and authentic. Eliza extended her hand across the table, her fingertips lightly grazing his. We don't have much, she murmured softly. Jonas gently turned his hand, intertwining their fingers with deliberate slowness. I have sufficient. Eliza's eyes glistened with unfallen tears. Is it truly your desire to have us here, Jonas? Not merely until spring, only when the danger has subsided. Yet, for the betterment? Jonas clasped her hand softly. Your presence has transformed my perception of this place. I perceive it in another way. It evokes the warmth of home once more. Her breath hitched. Then say it, she whispered, kindly. He gazed into her eyes, his voice a mere whisper against the backdrop of the crackling fire. Remain, Eliza, remain, and embrace this as your sanctuary. Welcome to your new sanctuary. That was everything she required. Her expression shattered, tears cascading quietly as she rose and traversed the distance that lay between them. Jonas stood up as well. Before either could utter another word, Eliza leaned her forehead against his chest, her arms wrapping around him with a firm embrace. Jonas embraced her, a steadfast warmth enveloping them both, not driven by hunger nor by desperation, but by the allure of promise, the allure of dawns rich with the scent of freshly baked bread and the joyful sounds of children at play, of evenings gathered by the flickering flames, etching tales into timber and whispering aspirations that remained unspoken, of a family forged through choice, resilience, and unwavering struggle. As the night deepened, with the fire dwindling to embers and the children nestled in peaceful slumber, Nathan began to stir. He stepped out softly, discovering Jonas by the window, gazing over the moonlit valley. Jonas, the boy inquired gently. Jonas was taken aback. Nathan paused, dragging his foot across the floor in a moment of uncertainty. Is it acceptable for us to refer to this place as home now? Jonas felt a lump in his throat, a heavy sensation that made swallowing a challenge. Indeed, Nathan, he murmured softly. It has found its way back to the embrace of home. Nathan nodded, a wave of relief washing over his youthful features. Yet just as he was about to depart, he posed another question, one that struck a chord deeper than Jonas had anticipated. Would it be all right if I referred to you by another name as well? Jonas felt a constriction in his chest. What is that? Nathan edged nearer, his voice a mere murmur. Paw. Jonas felt a sudden hitch in his breath. He remained silent. He extended his arms and enveloped the boy in a warm embrace, drawing him near as the boy's arms clung tightly around his waist. Eliza lingered in the doorway, a silent observer with a gentle smile, her hand delicately placed upon her heart. As the final whispers of winter slipped away into the darkness, the essence of home took hold within the very fabric of the space. Woven into the walls, the flickering flames and the warm pulses of those who now inhabited it. Spring had fully arrived now. The creek behind the cabin grew more vocal with each passing day, its frosty shackles now a distant memory. New buds emerged vibrantly from trees that had previously stood stark, while the meadow grass stretches eagerly toward the expanding sunlight. Yet, the shadow of winter had one final act to unfold. It arrived not with snowstorms or harsh gales, but through the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats, steady and known. Jonas Hale recognized the sound long before the rider appeared over the ridge. Matthew Crowley. On this occasion, he journeyed by himself. No mercenaries, no corrupt lawmen. A man, weary and frayed, his once elegant coat now cloaked in dust, his bravado faded by the weight of distance and the sting of failure. Jonas arrived and stood on the porch, his hands resting quietly at his sides. The cabin door loomed ajar behind him. Eliza appeared, calm and unwavering. She stood her ground this time. Nathan, Lila, and Ben chose not to conceal themselves either. They stood beside their mother, their heads held high, observing intently. This had become their sanctuary, their stronghold. Matthew brought his horse to a halt, dismounting with deliberate slowness. His boots sank into the yielding mud, each step devoid of the once confident snap that characterized his stride. Jonas remained silent. There was no necessity for him to do so. It was Matthew who shattered the stillness first. "I came for them," he said, his voice gravelly and hesitant. Jonas arched an eyebrow. "The last I recall, the court rendered that decision on your behalf." Matthew offered a feeble sneer. "The dynamics of courts evolve. So do people," Jonas retorted, his tone icy yet incisive. Matthew's gaze darted to Eliza, his jaw clenched, yet the spark had faded away. "What is this, I wonder?" He spat with a sharp bitterness. "You take on the role of my wife's partner, nurturing my children as if they belong to you now?" Eliza advanced with a steady determination, her demeanor unflinching. "They were never yours, Matthew," she declared, her voice cutting through the air with a precision sharper than any knife. "All you offered them was fear. You abandoned them to their fate. Jonas offered them a gift that was beyond your reach." Matthew scoffed, yet the sound rang empty. "I was the essence that coursed through their veins." "Blood," Jonas said, his voice growing steely, "doesn't provide warmth at night, doesn't repair toys or soothe them when they're unwell. Blood failed to instruct Nathan in the art of splitting wood, nor did it enhance Lila's reading skills or restore Ben's ability to smile." Matthew remained still, the impact of the words striking him with a force greater than any blow. As Jonas stood there, Nathan's voice sliced through the silence, shattering the tension that hung in the air. The boy declared with confidence, "You're not our pa." Lila trailed behind, her soft voice unwavering. Even Ben, shyly clinging to his sister's skirt, nodded solemnly alongside Jonas. Matthew's shoulders drooped, as though the very words bore a burden far too great to support. He cast a final glance at Eliza. A glimmer danced in his gaze. Perhaps a sense of regret lingers, or perhaps it was the understanding that what he had lost would never return. In silence, he pivoted and ascended onto his steed. This time, as he rode away, he refrained from glancing back. As he vanished beyond the ridge, an unfamiliar sensation washed over me. The final remnants of snow had vanished. As dusk settled, the cabin radiated a warmth that felt more inviting than ever before. Jonas lingered by the warm glow of the hearth, his hands deftly whittling as the laughter of children danced in the air around him. Eliza stood at the stove, stirring the simmering stew, her hair cascading gently around her shoulders. The tempest has ceased beyond the walls, and tranquility reigns within. As the last bite of dinner was savored and the children settled into their cozy shared room, Jonas and Eliza found themselves in the warm glow of the fire, enveloped in a moment of solitude. For a moment, silence enveloped them both. The crackling of the wood and the distant chorus of frogs filtering through the open window spoke volumes. Eventually, Eliza stood from her chair and traversed the room, halting directly before Jonas. Her eyes, once brimming with caution, now radiated pure certainty. "I truly meant what I said," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Jonas inclined his head ever so slightly. "Is this truly home?" Eliza nodded, her voice imbued with a gentle warmth and a hint of assurance. "Indeed, it's not solely the walls or the land that matter, but rather you. You lifted us when the world sought to weigh us down. You remained." Jonas placed the piece of wood down and rose to his feet. He extended his hand toward hers, his calloused fingers enveloping hers, as if they were destined to intertwine effortlessly. "I had no idea how much I needed you," he confessed softly. "Each and every one of you." "You have us now," Eliza declared, "should you desire our presence." Jonas smiled then, a rare, serene smile that illuminated his eyes. "I desire all that you carry with you each morning as you step through that door, even the clamor that accompanies it. The cacophony, in particular." Eliza tilted her head, her lips brushing gently against his. "There's no need for haste or elaborate displays, simply a sense of belonging." As they separated, she leaned her head against his chest, attuned to the rhythmic pulse beneath. "I used to wonder," she murmured, "if I would ever feel safe again." Jonas embraced her more firmly. He assured her, "You are safe, forever." Outside, the final whispers of winter dissolved gently into the tender embrace of the earth. Within the warm embrace of the crackling hearth, a man who had once known emptiness and a woman who had once felt shattered stood intertwined, not by mere happenstance, but by deliberate decision. Affection in this place was not a cacophony or a rush. It was sculpted gradually with careful hands, akin to timber, akin to faith. As the night deepened and their home stood resolute around them, Eliza murmured a secret meant solely for Jonas's ears. "We are no longer merely surviving, Jonas. We exist in this moment." For the very first time, Jonas Hale found himself believing her. Not every family comes into existence by chance, some are carefully selected. How would you safeguard what is dear to you when the echoes of the past resurface? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Your words hold significance in this space. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like, share it with others, and subscribe for more enchanting tales of second chances and newfound homes.